Why are you sitting here all alone, sweetheart? Solange Diouf's voice was soft as a breath, her Senegalese accent gliding over each word like a gentle lullaby. Amirah startled. The question caught her off guard, not because it was too personal, but because it was the first time anyone had acknowledged her presence that evening. She blinked, slowly turned her head, half wondering if she had imagined it. But Solange was truly there, leaning slightly forward, a silver tray balanced perfectly on one hand, her warm mahogany eyes cutting through the sea of glittering gowns and sparkling champagne flutes. No one had spoken to Amirah. Not a single polite nod. The guests walked by as if she were a piece of furniture. No worse, as if she were just part of the backdrop. Invisible. And then came this woman, a server, someone meant to stay tucked in the shadows. Yet she was the first to pierce through the cold silence with a sentence that wrapped Amirah in an invisible wave. Her throat tightened. The grand ballroom of Château de Lumière, the most luxurious resort in Lyon, glowed in ivory and gold, chandeliers like upside-down galaxies hanging from the ceiling, while a jazz band played La Vie en Rose near the bar. It was a party designed to overwhelm with opulence. But in a dim corner near the service entrance, one 6-year-old Amirah Kinte sat in her wheelchair, her dark blue gown pooling around her like a spill of night. Solange had passed her several times that evening. The first time, she barely noticed just a girl sitting still, hands folded neatly on her lap. She realized the second time that no one was speaking to the girl. By the third pass, Solange frowned. The girl hadn't moved, hadn't smiled, hadn't spoken. Not a single person in that glittering room had looked her way. Not one. That couldn't be right. Now, standing beside Amirah, Solange's presence felt oddly profound. She wasn't just offering canapés or pouring wine, but acknowledging something deeper. A presence. A dignity. An untold story. "I'm fine," Amirah said quickly, her voice taut, defensive though her fingers betrayed her, twisting nervously at the edge of her gown. Solange tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable but kind. "You don't look fine. And if I may say so, this party is missing its brightest spark." Amirah nearly laughed. Nearly. "Everyone's busy," she said, trying for nonchalance. "I'm not part of their main attraction." And that wasn't a lie. She had arrived early with a private assistant who had helped her out of the van, into her seat, and rolled her to a table beside a massive bouquet of white lilies. Since then, the world had spun on without her. Even the photographer had politely asked her to move out of frame. "I don't belong here," Amirah whispered. "This isn't a space made for me." Solange glanced around the room where guests clinked glasses, posed for photos, and gossiped over foie gras. "Oh, my dear, it's not that you don't belong. They've forgotten how to see the people who remind them of life's uncomfortable truths." The words hung in the air. Amirah swallowed hard. They stung her eyes unexpectedly. She looked at Solange again this time, truly, and in those brown eyes was a kind of wisdom, and lines carved not from age, but from patience. "I used to dance," Amirah blurted. The words escaped before she could stop them. "Before the accident, I was going to be a choreographer." Solange's face softened. "Really?" "My youngest, Sophia, used to twirl all over the house whenever dance competitions came on television. Nearly broke the coffee table trying to pirouette." Despite herself, Amirah smiled faintly. "I was on the teen dance team at Jean Moulin High. That day, we were on our way to a charity gala. A truck ran a red light." Her voice trailed off. "I'm so sorry," Solange said, and there was no mistaking the sincerity in her tone. Amirah shrugged one shoulder. The other had been stiff for a long time now. "They say I might regain partial function. But it's slow. My dad never danced again either. Since then, he used to be strong. CEO of Kinte Group. You should have seen him before the stroke." Solange gently perched on the edge of a nearby banquet chair, her tray still balanced with poise. "Funny thing," she said, "many people think dancing is just legs and rhythm. But really, it's the ability to listen. Listen to the music, listen to yourself, and listen to who you still want to become." Amirah stared at her. Solange wasn't like the other servers, always rushing and avoiding eye contact. She carried something else, a gravity, a quiet pride that didn't come from her uniform. You used to dance? Amirah asked. Solange nodded slowly. Tap dance. Dakar, 1985. Not professionally. Community center. Church socials. Until I lost a leg to diabetes complications after moving to France. But in my mind, I never stopped dancing. When the choir sings every Sunday, I still feel the rhythm in my bones. And in that moment, two worlds, one from mahogany boardrooms, one from tiled church floors, sat side by side, in perfect silence. A woman's voice rang out sweet, sharp, and cold as marble tiles. Solange, table 9 is still waiting for their appetizers. Amirah turned her head. Margot Ellis, executive assistant to the Kinte Group, was approaching. Her meticulously curled blonde hair, flawless makeup, and heels clicking across the marble floor pulsed like a metronome of pride. Solange didn't flinch. Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to make sure the young lady needed nothing else. Margot glanced at Amirah so quickly it might as well have never happened. She's fine. She has everything she needs. But Amirah saw it, the slight tightening of Solange's jaw, the subtle furrow of her brow, as if inside, the woman wanted to object, rise, shout. But she didn't. She only stood, lifted her tray, and turned away. Margot leaned closer to Amirah, her voice low but edged with steel. It's best not to get too friendly with the staff, Amirah. People will talk. Amirah said nothing. But something inside her shifted. Something that had quietly fallen after the accident began to stir again. A flash crossed her mind, her own body on a stage, lights pouring down, music surging, her turns claiming space without asking, without needing permission. That was a different girl. A girl who had never bowed her head. Solange re-entered the crowd, tray raised, gliding through sequined gowns and glinting lights like a silent declaration. Why are you sitting here all alone? Solange had asked. And for the first time that evening, Amirah honestly asked herself that question. The music played on. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. No one noticed that a dim corner of the grand hall had just lit up for the first time. If you've ever felt invisible in a crowded room, you might understand that moment when someone sees you and you suddenly know you exist. Amirah didn't move, but her fingers began to tap lightly on the wooden armrest of her wheelchair, a steady rhythm, soft as breath. No one heard it but her. In the far corner, the jazz band changed songs. Solange had disappeared from view, but her words remained. You don't need legs to dance. You need a heart that hasn't given up. The piano became a new melody, soft, low, gliding like mist, but Amirah barely noticed the change. She was still sitting beside the vase of white lilies, her fingers tapping lightly against the wooden armrest of her wheelchair. Not in any precise rhythm, just a reflex, a stir from the part of her soul that refused to fall asleep. Suddenly, a small white porcelain plate was placed gently on the table before her light, as if a breeze had just passed. She looked up. Solange had returned. In her hand was an empty tray, and on the table she had laid down a small sandwich neatly cut into triangular halves. I noticed you didn't touch the main courses, Solange said, her voice as calm and flowing as water. Thought you might want something simple. Unfussy. Amirah's eyes widened. Not because of the food, but because Solange had come back. You came back? She asked. Solange shrugged, offering a small smile. My mother used to say, if you see someone hungry and don't offer them food, don't call yourself kind. Amirah looked down at the plate. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a piece, but Solange didn't offer help, and she didn't hover with pity. She stood there as if her presence alone could keep Amirah's hand from faltering. You remind me of Sophia, Solange said, sitting beside her again. She used to be so quiet until she got on stage. Then the whole of Dakar knew she'd arrived. She? Dance too? Amirah asked, chewing slowly. Everywhere. Hallways, parking lots, gas stations. She said the world was her stage. Solange laughed a light, real laugh that rang gently. Amirah nodded, and something warm unfurled in her chest. My dad used to dance with me, she said, her voice dipping low. We had this New Year's Eve tradition no matter where we were. We'd put on La Seine and dance in the living room. When I was little, he'd have me stand on his feet. Solange listened silently. No interruptions, no interjections. The last time we danced, he told me, next year, we'll dance at your wedding, show the world how my daughter owns the floor. Amirah gave a dry chuckle, not from amusement. And then reality hit. Wheelchairs, strokes, painkillers, the pity in everyone's eyes. Solange didn't wince, didn't retreat. She met Amirah's gaze directly. I don't see pity, she said. I see a girl who showed up, head held high, and still shines brighter than half this room. Amirah swallowed hard. It wasn't the compliment that caught in her throat, it was how deeply Solange believed what she was saying, as if it were gospel. Solange leaned back slightly, then added, almost as a side note, you know, dancing doesn't require standing. Amirah frowned. It doesn't? Rhythm lives in your hands, breath, shoulders, and smile. My prosthetic doesn't know the beat, but I still tap dance every Sunday morning in my soul. Amirah looked at her eyes wide, the chandelier light catching Solange's hair in a way that made her look less like someone from the back kitchen and more like someone stepping out of life's real stage. You lost your leg. When? She asked. 5 years ago, Solange said matter-of-factly. Sophia cried more than I did. I told her, baby girl, to feel rhythm, you don't need 2 legs. You need a heart that still wants to dance. Amirah was silent for a long time. In her mind, she saw Solange in a cramped kitchen, tap dancing on wet tile, making sounds no one else could hear, except herself. The band began to play La Scène, piano leading, drums tapping gently. A violin is threading in with low notes. Amirah's heart clenched. Solange turned to her. How about it? About what? A seated dance. Right here, right now. Just the 2 of us. No stage, no spotlight. Just a promise kept in a new way. Amirah looked down at her hands. Fingers that had trembled at texting now suddenly longed to move. She hadn't swayed to music in nearly a year, but something inside her had cracked open. A rebellion? A calling? Or a tradition left unfinished? She nodded. Solange stood, set her tray aside, and took 1 step forward. May I? She asked, holding out both hands. Amirah placed hers in Solange's so lightly, as if she were touching the heartbeat of memory. Solange leaned in, moving like a breeze, and Amirah followed. Slow at first, then more fluid, their shoulders tilted with the melody, their hands shifting in soft motion. Amirah's hair stirred gently beneath the crystal chandelier light, as if a spell had been cast, illuminating a forgotten corner. The grand hall carried on. People ate. Photos were taken. No one saw them. But to Amirah, the world had paused. One had lost her leg. One had lost her ability to walk. And still, they danced. As the final notes of La Scène faded, Amirah's eyes stung. Solange gave a subtle nod. That dance wasn't out of pity. It was a promise, fulfilled in a new form. Amirah whispered, "Thank you." Solange squeezed her hand gently. "Don't thank me yet. The real dance is just beginning." And then Solange turned away, but this time, Amirah didn't see her retreat. She saw her advance like a performer who had just finished the opening number. Amirah no longer felt like a side character in her story for the first time in months. The next morning, the skies over Lyon were a dull gray, and the rain fell like smoke, sketching patterns on the hotel window. Amirah curled up in a wool blanket in the armchair, her eyes following each droplet, tracing a path downward. In her mind, fragments from the previous night replayed slowly. Solange's hands, the warm gold light on her shoulders, and the silent pulse beneath every gentle movement. A dance, just a few minutes. But it had cracked something inside her, not a shattering crack. A fracture that let her breathe. She hadn't told her father. Kwame Kinte, once known as the Lion of French Tech, now lay in a private recovery room on the eastern wing of the chateau, silent and nearly motionless. After the stroke, his eyes had clouded over, only reacting when called by name. He used to say, "When I walk into a room, the air changes." And it always did. People stood straighter, laughed louder, and scrambled to impress. Amirah had once loved that strength that made her feel safe. But after the accident, and then the stroke, that presence vanished. No voice, no laughter, no firm footsteps. Only the hiss of IV lines and news broadcasts playing too loud at night. Amirah wheeled herself to his room. The air was thick with disinfectant and powdered oatmeal. Margot Ellis stood at the counter, scanning morning medication labels. "Good morning," Amirah whispered. Margot turned, her face flawless like a beauty ad. "Good morning, Amirah. Your father is resting after physical therapy. The doctors adjusted his medication. He needs calm and stability. He's getting more unresponsive," Amirah frowned. "They said he'd start speaking again soon." "It's a process," Margot replied, her voice clipped. "You have to trust the treatment protocol." Amirah pressed her lips together, saying nothing. She wheeled closer to the bed. Her father's eyes opened vacant momentarily, then slowly focused on her face, a faint flicker of recognition. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. "I danced last night. Sort of. With someone who reminded me of you." His left hand twitched slightly. Amirah leaned down and gently held it. She said, "You don't need legs to dance, only a heart that still wants to move." She smiled softly, her throat tight. "You used to say that. Remember? When I sprained my ankle before the Jean Moulin recital. You said, 'You just need your heart, the rhythm will follow.'" His eyes fluttered shut again. Amirah remained by his side, her hand in his. "We're still a team, right? Kinte and Kinte. You built the system. I bring the rhythm. Isn't that the deal?" Later, she returned to the ballroom, now stripped of celebration. Servers were clearing tables, fresh flowers tossed into trash bags, red carpet rolled up and shoved onto trolleys. But down the mirrored hallway, someone remained. Solange, folding napkins, quietly humming a Wolof lullaby only she and the wind could hear. "You used to tap dance," Amirah said, wheeling closer. Solange looked up, a hesitant smile blooming on her face. "That's right. My mother said I had rhythm before I could walk. Can you show me?" Amirah asked, gaze steady. "What you did in the corner last night." Solange chuckled. "I haven't performed for anyone since 2095, and that was at a church fundraiser. Half the guests clapped off beat." Amirah tilted her head. "Please." There was something in her voice that made Solange pause. Not curiosity. It was a quiet longing, a hunger to feel alive again. Solange looked around. Only a few staff remained, vacuum cleaners humming faintly in the distance. She gently pulled up her pant leg, revealing a sleek carbon fiber prosthetic, planted her real foot, shifted her weight, and stepped into the open space beneath the glass dome. A deep breath, one hand on her hip, and she began. Heel taps, soft at first, then stronger. Each strike against the marble echoed like a memory awakening. Then came the classic triplet. Heel, heel, toe, toe, heel, toe. Solange's face transformed. She closed her eyes, spine rising tall. She wasn't just dancing. She was calling her name back. Amirah clapped as she finished with a quick spin and a final emphatic tap, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I could feel every beat," she whispered. Solange panted slightly, still smiling. Then it was real. From the far end of the corridor, the sharp staccato of high heels pierced the air like a razor drawing a line. Margot Ellis, clipboard in hand, expression tight as ever. "Amirah, you have a scheduled family therapy session in 10 minutes. We need to stay on track." "I didn't see that on the schedule," Amirah replied evenly. "It was added this morning. Your father's physician requested structured engagement, and this," she glanced at Solange with thinly veiled disdain, "is not part of the plan." Solange held her head high. "We're just warming up physically and emotionally." Margot's smile was razor thin. "I'm sure the kitchen could use you." "I'm on break," Solange said evenly. The air thickened. Amirah looked between the two women, tension stretched tight as a wire. "I'll go," she said at last. "But not yet. I'm not done talking with Miss Solange." Margot's jaw clenched, but she said nothing more. She turned and walked away, heels clicking into silence. Amirah exhaled deeply. "She's always like that," she muttered, "like she's running the entire hotel with just her glare." "She's afraid," Solange said softly. Amirah blinked. "Afraid of what?" "Of people who remind her she can't control everything. People like you. Like me. People with scars. We disturb their illusions." Amirah was quiet for a long moment. Then suddenly, "Will you teach me to tap dance?" Solange smiled, warmth lighting her eyes. "Of course." But first, we begin with rhythm. Let your hands learn to feel it. 10 minutes later, in a quiet corner of the hall, a black woman with a prosthetic leg and a girl in a wheelchair were tapping out a rhythm with their hands echoing each other, beat by beat. It wasn't a dance. Not yet. But it was movement. At dawn the next morning, golden light spilled across the southern terrace of Château de Lumière. The day's rays streamed through rows of manicured pine trees, casting a soft glow over the garden where dewdrops clung to the white roses like crystal tears. Amirah had been there since 6 a.m. Her wheelchair was positioned in the center of the stone-paved terrace, next to a small silver-gray Bluetooth speaker. Her hands rested on her lap, palms gently open, ready to receive rhythm not from sound, but from sensation. Solange arrived a few minutes later, wearing worn black sneakers and a cardigan frayed at the cuffs, her smile as radiant as the morning sunlight breaking on the stone walls. "Ready for class?" she asked, half teasing, half serious. "For the first time in my life, maybe I am," Amirah replied, nodding softly. They began not with dancing, but with rhythm on the palms. Solange tapped lightly on her leg, adding a vocal cue. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, Amirah repeated. Awkward at first, then steadier. Then they moved the beat to their palms, then to a nearby table. And so, every morning, for 7 days straight, Amirah and Solange met on the terrace. On the third day, Solange brought croissants and coffee. On the fourth, she showed Amirah a video clip of her daughter dancing at a village festival in Dakar. Pride and quiet longing flickered in her eyes. On the fifth, they played Moonlight Serenade and tried moving in sync. On the sixth, Amirah laughed and shouted, "Are we dancing or doing cardio?" Solange winked. Who said art doesn't require stamina? But on the eighth morning, Amirah arrived even earlier than usual. She positioned her wheelchair just right, hands on the wheels, excitement in her chest like the morning she first performed at school. Solange didn't come. Half an hour passed. Then an hour. Then 2. Amirah returned to the service wing. She rolled through the grand hall, into the kitchen, and stopped in front of the staff lounge. A young sous chef glanced up at her, hesitant. "Where's Miss Solange?" Amirah asked plainly. He swallowed. "She didn't come in today." Her brows furrowed. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. "She was let go yesterday." The air froze. "What? Why?" He looked down. "They said she violated protocol, got too close to a guest." Amirah's hands tightened around her chair. "You mean with me?" He only shook his head. "I'm not allowed to say more." Amirah didn't return to her room. She didn't cry. She rolled herself straight to the temporary office of the Kinte Foundation set up in a converted conference room at the chateau. The door was open. Inside, Margot Ellis was meticulously reviewing supplier contracts. "I need to talk," Amirah said, her voice cold as steel. Margot didn't look up. "If this is about Solange." "It is." Amirah cut her off. "You had no right to do that." Margot set her pen down and sighed. "I followed the procedure. Staff aren't permitted to have personal relationships with guests, especially minors." She crossed a line. "She was teaching me to dance." Amirah nearly shouted. She overstepped. "We have an image to maintain." Amirah rolled closer. "What image?" "The CEO's daughter being wheeled around as a prop to prove the family's still fine, and the one person who treated me like a real human being gets punished for it?" Margot faltered for a moment, then her face returned to ice. "You're being emotional, Amirah." "No," Amirah said, slow and clear. "I'm more clear-headed than I've ever been." She turned and left. No permission asked. No head bowed. That evening, Amirah returned to her father's room. He sat in his motorized recliner, eyes glazed, facing the television. She pulled out her phone and played a recording from one of the morning sessions with Solange, the rhythm of clapping hands, their laughter, and Solange's voice saying, "You don't need legs to dance. You need a reason." "I'll find her again," Amirah whispered. "And when I do, we'll dance again. But next time the whole room will be watching." Her father's left hand moved, just slightly, but it was enough for Amirah to know he was listening. The garden where they once practiced was now silent, filled only with drooping rose bushes and the wind whispering through the rows of pine. Amirah returned there, sitting alone in the same spot, her hands resting quietly on the cold stone table. No tapping, no Solange. Only silence, the kind that had swallowed her for more than a year. Beneath the tea tray was a small white envelope with her name handwritten in neat cursive. Amirah. Her fingers trembled as she opened the letter. Dear Amirah, I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. They said I broke a rule. A rule I never saw written, that teaching a young girl to dance was somehow unacceptable. But I didn't just do it for you. I did it for myself too. Watching you reach, stumble, laugh, miss a beat, then keep going, reminded me of Sophia, my daughter, before life buried her under its weight. And it reminded me of myself before pain silenced me. You have a light not blinding, but steady, glowing warmer the longer someone stands near. Keep moving even when they tell you to stay still. Keep dancing even when no one claps. And if one day you hear La Scène again, close your eyes. Because I'll be dancing too. Solange. Amirah read it 3 times. By the third, tears had fallen. Not from sadness, but from anger. Anger that kindness had been punished. Anger at the silence of those in power. Anger at herself, for once thinking she couldn't do anything. No more. That afternoon, Amirah wheeled straight into the makeshift office of the Kinte Foundation, where assistants were deep in end-of-year gala logistics. She didn't knock. Raymond DuPont, her father's longtime lawyer, was reviewing contracts. He looked up. Amirah, I need you to send a letter to the entire board, she said firmly. Raymond tilted his head. You wrote a letter? No, she replied. I lived it. He took the envelope, skimmed the first few lines. His eyes widened. You know this will cause waves. I hope it does. 2 days later, the Kinte Foundation board held a closed-door meeting in the grand ballroom. Amirah wasn't invited, but she didn't need to be. The letter spoke for her, about an employee who wasn't dismissed for misconduct, but for seeing what others ignored. About a girl who had been pushed aside and was brought back to life through rhythm. About a foundation that claimed to inspire but feared those who truly did. About a proposal. A permanent program called Toujours en Mouvement, Always in Motion. An initiative to teach adaptive arts to people with disabilities, directed by Solange Diouf. That evening, Raymond knocked on Amirah's door. You made the entire room go silent. What happened? She asked. Officially, Solange was never fired, merely suspended, pending review. So, there's a chance? Raymond smiled gently. More than a chance. Someone told me your letter reminded them why this foundation was started in the first place. Not for prestige, but for dignity. Amirah took a deep breath. It felt like the first full breath she'd taken in months. The next morning, in a small, unused dome chamber behind the garden, a forgotten space was quietly transformed into a temporary stage. Wooden flooring, low-hung string lights, and an old smoke machine salvaged from the local theater set up by Kevin, a young staffer with bright eyes. Want to perform a piece? Kevin asked, hopeful. Just one dance, Amirah replied. But it has to reach someone. She sent the invitations herself. Without explanation, a few board members, some staff, key members of the organizing committee, and Margot Ellis. Then she made her final trip, through 3 churches, past a grumpy taxi driver. And finally, during an afternoon choir rehearsal, she found Solange sitting in the back pews, eyes closed, gently tapping her rhythm to the hymn. Miss Solange, Amirah called softly. Solange opened her eyes, a flicker of surprise, then a smile, deep and genuine. Well now. Seems the lion wind has blown you back to me. Amirah moved closer. I need one more dance. But this time, the whole room will be watching. Solange blinked. You've got a floor? Music? Lights? I've got enough, Amirah said. I'm just missing one person. Solange rose to her feet. Her face grew solemn, not in resistance, but reverence for the moment's weight. Then let's show them, she said. Something they'll never forget. The soft golden glow of string lights shimmered through the haze of smoke, casting a dreamlike glow across the glass-walled room behind the Château de Lumière raised garden. No one would recognize it as a former breakout conference space. Now it was a miniature theater, where a dance would take place without microphones, without introductions, yet command the attention of everyone present. Amirah sat behind a curtain of ivy and soft LED lights, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair, a simple black dress. Hair pulled into a high bun, her gaze clear, unwavering. She was no longer the girl from last week who sat beneath chandeliers with a clenched jaw and lowered eyes. Solange stood beside her. Wide-leg black trousers, a wine-colored blouse, carbon prosthetic leg gleaming beneath a neatly rolled cuff revealing, not hiding. Her face was a mix of fierce pride and quiet fear. "Are you ready?" Solange whispered. Amirah didn't turn. Her eyes stayed fixed beyond the blinking lights. "I was born in silence. Tonight, I speak." The doors opened. Guests stepped in quietly. Chairs are arranged in 3 neat rows, no grand entrance, no cameras. But every eye was waiting. Margot Ellis entered last clad in a slate-gray suit, a folder in hand like a shield. She sat at the end of the row, silently watching. But her gaze never left the stage. A soft chime rang. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight swept gently to the center stage. Solange stepped out first. No tray, no uniform, only herself standing tall, full of grace. Her eyes locked forward, as if staring directly at everyone who had once tried to shrink her. The music began. La scène. Instrumental, just piano and cello. Each note is as heavy as a breath in the night. From the left, Amirah rolled forward. The light widened. She and Solange met at the center stage. No words were spoken. Solange extended a hand. Amirah placed hers on it. And then they moved. Not a gala-style performance. No dramatic spins. No flying skirts. But there were gentle tilts, synchronized movements of shoulders and hands, soft taps against the wheelchair frame that tap-taps standing in for percussion. Solange spun lightly, then guided Amirah in a graceful arc, not fast, not forceful, but precise. For the first time, the audience witnessed a pirouette executed by wheels, not feet. And again the prosthetic tapped the floor in perfect rhythm, seamlessly blending with the hand claps of Amirah's steady tempo. The room was utterly silent. As the final note faded, Amirah raised one arm high, deliberate. Solange bowed, kissing the back of her hand, a gesture not of submission, but of restored dignity. Silence. Then applause. Not polite, not obligatory. Applause from the gut, from people who had been moved. Raymond, the old lawyer, stood first. Then others, one by one, breaking free of their masks of formality. At the back row, a young kitchen worker wiped away tears. A former server clapped until her palms turned red. A stranger whispered, "That's how you teach the world to look again." Only one person remained seated. Margot Ellis. She didn't leave, but her sharp gaze had softened. No longer defensive, but like someone forced to confront what she had tried to deny. After the performance, Amirah was trembling from adrenaline backstage. "You did it," Solange whispered, kneeling beside her. Amirah shook her head, eyes blurred with tears. "No. We did it." Just then, the curtain shifted. Raymond entered, followed by 2 board members, Madame Lemarchand and Mr. Taras, both known for their conservatism. They looked from Solange to Amirah. Madame Lemarchand spoke first. "Amirah, that performance was unlike anything we've seen." Amirah nodded, silent. Mr. Taras added softly, "Miss Diouf, we've reviewed the situation. Your suspension is being lifted immediately." Solange paused. "Thank you," she said, "but I won't return to serving shrimp cocktails." They blinked. "Excuse me?" Amirah lifted her chin. "I have a proposal." Raymond handed them a file. The formal plan for Toujours en Mouvement, Always in Motion, an adaptive arts program supported by the Kinte Foundation, designed for people with disabilities and seniors across France. Artistic Director Solange Diouf. Madame Lemarchand flipped through the pages. "You want funding?" "Not just funding," Amirah replied. "I want commitment. Space. Visibility. Community outreach." They looked at Solange. She smiled. "You've got rhythm, patience, and time. What more do we need?" Silence. "We should have done this long ago," Madame Lemarchand murmured. "I move to approve," Mr. Taras said. "I second," she replied. That night, Amirah returned to her father's room. He sat in a soft lamplight. The television turned off, and there was no sound. She opened her phone and played the freshly recorded clip. On screen, she and Solange, a small circle of light, rhythmic claps echoing. her silhouette spinning across the wooden floor, and Solange's face, tilted downward, offering a dance born from the heart. Her father's eyes followed, slow, but unwavering. "Are you proud of me, Dad?" she whispered. His lips moved. Silence. Then a gravelly sound escaped. "Always." 2 weeks after the fateful performance, the name Toujours en Mouvement began appearing in small headlines across Lyon's local newspapers. The Dance of Life, an arts program for the disabled by the Kinte Foundation. Solange Diouf. From server to artistic leader, Amirah Kinte returns in an unexpected role. What began as a single workshop in the Château's dome room, followed by a short session at a local care home, soon rippled outward like magic on water. An 8-9-year-old woman who hadn't stood in 12 years rose not to walk, but to tap rhythms on her dining table under Solange's guidance. A boy with motor impairment and no speech smiled for the first time while Amirah taught him to keep rhythm with his hands. They didn't need to be perfect. They only needed the courage to move. The first official seminar was held at the community theater in northern Lyon. No VIP seating. No ticket tiers. Participants disabled, elderly, autistic children, or simply people trying to breathe again after trauma sat side by side. Solange stood on stage, no microphone, no titles, yet each word dropped into the room like a ceremonial drumbeat. Feet that can no longer walk still create movement. No one is born off beat, the world hasn't learned to listen. In the front row, Amirah sat in her wheelchair, hands on the rhythm board, eyes alight. She no longer needed a grand stage, chandeliers, or velvet curtain ballrooms. She had found her role not as a performer, but as someone who woke those forced into silence. Just days later, a grainy video secretly recorded by an audience member showed Solange and Amirah performing their now iconic tap duet. It went viral, not just in France. Across Europe, an elderly server with a prosthetic leg and a girl in a wheelchair perform a dance that moved the world to tears. Amirah received messages from arts organizations in Florence, Vienna, and Amsterdam. They invited her to speak, expand, and take the model global. One late night, Raymond knocked on her door. "You're famous now," he said, voice rough with emotion. "But what makes me proudest is that you never forgot Solange." She smiled. "She was my first beat." He nodded. "And you're the answer to a generation pushed aside." The next day, Amirah submitted a bold proposal to the Kinte Foundation board to turn Toujours en Mouvement into an official division of the foundation, with its budget, staff, and a 5-year roadmap across Europe. She nominated Solange as artistic director, not a symbolic title, but with real decision-making power over funding, programming, staffing, and vision. The boardroom was tense. Margot Ellis sat silent, her face unreadable. Some older members hesitated, concerned about appointing someone without a degree, who didn't know Excel and had once served hors d'oeuvre. Amirah didn't counter with resume. She played a clip of the first workshop. The room fell silent. Solange stood at the center of a circle of forgotten people. No mic, no lights, yet every eye turned toward her like she was the only star in the room. When the video ended, no one had questions. The proposal passed by unanimous vote. Amirah turned to Margot. For the first time, she met a gaze not sharp but quiet. Margot stood, walked over, and placed a folded paper on the table. "My formal resignation from project management," she said. "I believe it's time the next generation chooses the direction. And time we let those who can truly feel lead." No smile, no tears, just a slight bow, like an apology left unspoken. Amirah nodded. "Thank you, Margot." That night, on the southern balcony of the chateau, the very first training ground, Amirah and Solange sat side by side, watching string lights glow like falling stars. "What are you thinking?" Solange asked. Amirah smiled gently. "I used to think my life ended the day that truck hit us. But it turns out, I just hadn't learned the new rhythm yet." Solange raised her teacup, clinking it gently against Amirah's glass of juice. "And that rhythm, dear girl, will take you farther than any stage ever could." Below them, a small group of children with disabilities rehearsed their first steps. Not perfect, not in sync, but their eyes glowed like candles in the heart of winter. Amirah looked down, her hand resting lightly on the rim of her wheel. "I'm ready now." 3 months after its debut in Lyon, Toujours en Mouvement expanded to 6 cities across France: Lille, Marseille, Bordeaux, Toulouse, Strasbourg and Paris. Not through massive funding, not through flashy media campaigns, but through a quiet chain reaction. One forgotten person is stepping into the light at a time. Each new class brought something extraordinary. A father stood at the edge of the room, tapping his hands in rhythm for the first time beside his child with cerebral palsy. A 2-year-old woman, voiceless since a stroke, giggled out loud after completing a simple cross-hand movement. A young Syrian refugee with a missing left leg whispered, "I'm not afraid of the music anymore. I'm afraid of forgetting how to hear it." Amirah traveled from city to city, not as the CEO's daughter, not as a stage star, but as a messenger of rebirth. She didn't give keynote speeches. She sat with children, tapped rhythms beside elders, spoke with nurses, teachers, and even people experiencing homelessness. And when someone asked, "How did you come up with this?" she replied, "I was once forgotten too, but an old server with a tray and a sincere question returned to me. And now I'm just passing that question on. What do you need?" In Paris, the first exhibition of the Toujours en Mouvement participants' photos and videos opened at a modern art center. At the center of the gallery hung a large portrait. Amirah in her wheelchair, eyes closed, one hand raised while Solange tapped rhythm into her open palm behind her. The photo was titled, "Le silence qui danse," the silence that dances. On opening night, hundreds lined up outside. Journalists from Japan, Canada, and Senegal stood waiting for interviews with Amirah and Solange. As usual, Solange smiled gently and tried to fade into the background. But this time, Amirah did something unexpected. She pulled Solange onto the stage. Holding a microphone, a rare act, Amirah said, "If you're looking at me and calling me inspiring, then you must understand this. I am the product of someone who was once overlooked, someone with no title, no authority, no degree, but with eyes that could see and a heart that could reach." She turned to Solange. "You saved me simply by asking if I was okay. And when no one else cared to hear, you listened not with ears, but with your whole being." Solange looked away, hiding the redness in her eyes. Amirah continued, "We live in a world where kindness sometimes gets dismissed. But if we are here today, it's because someone dared to be kind and dared to stand beside those who were left behind. This program, it's not about dance. It's not about therapy. It's not about publicity. It's about justice. Justice for those without a voice, so they can tell their stories in the language the world once denied them. Movement, rhythm, emotion, and presence. We don't teach them to dance. We remind them they never stopped moving." The room rose to its feet. No one shouted bravo. No one threw flowers. Only a profound silence, not of discomfort, but of deep acknowledgement. Margot Ellis, now strategic advisor to the foundation, stood backstage. For the first time, she reached out and shook Solange's hand. No stiffness. No barrier. "You were right," Margot whispered. "No," Solange replied softly. "We just both arrived a little late." That night, Amirah returned to the hotel. She opened her laptop and started a video call with her father. He had been practicing daily. His right hand now moved well enough to press the answer button. The screen flickered on his image, slightly blurred in low light, but his smile was unmistakable. Amirah turned the camera toward the hall, where students were still dancing, spinning, swaying. "Do you see it, Dad?" she said. It all started because one woman looked at a girl and believed there was still something inside her worth awakening. He nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you," he said. Clear. Steady. For the first time, Amirah cried not from pain, but because finally, every sound had returned. 1 year after the first performance at Château de Lumière, the Kinte Foundation launched Global Movement Day, the inaugural event connecting adaptive arts centers in 27 countries, performing a synchronized virtual sequence where no one stood fully upright, yet all moved forward. Amirah sat on the main stage in Bastille Square, Paris, once a battleground of revolutions, now witnessing a new kind of uprising, one of rhythm, trust, and human dignity. Thousands gathered, people with disabilities, artists, doctors, war veterans, orphans, refugees, professional dancers, and those who had never touched art. A massive screen linked Paris to Nairobi, Montreal, Kyoto, Buenos Aires, Cape Town, and Hanoi, where small groups, classrooms, and hospital wards all performed the same shared sequence. Slow, reach, sway, tap, lift. It wasn't choreography. It was a code of humanity. On stage, Solange Diouf, now senior artistic director of the international program, stepped forward to the steady rhythm of ancient hand drumming echoing across the square. She said nothing, raised her hand and nodded. Amirah wheeled beside her. No speech. No music. They tapped together. A disabled girl in the Netherlands raised her hand to follow. A man in Brazil, speechless since his stroke, wept as he completed his first repeated hand motion in 6 months. A nurse in Ghana whispered to her student, "I'm not teaching you to dance. I'm just reminding you that you're still here." That night, global media covered the event. But what captured the world's heart wasn't a viral dance clip, nor images of the Bastille gathering. It was a quiet, candid photo. Amirah sat beneath an old tree, holding Solange's hand. They said nothing, only watched as waves of people danced across the square. The photo was captioned, "Two women once uninvited to the hall now opening doors no one dared to knock on." Days later, at the United Nations Human Rights Summit, a UNESCO representative cited Toujours en Mouvement as a landmark case of arts accessibility being used to restore social connection and human dignity. The entire hall stood when Amirah Kinte's name was mentioned in the keynote. But Amirah wasn't there. She was in a small studio in Naples, Italy, teaching a group of children born with disabilities laughing, dancing, clapping offbeat. And she didn't correct them. She only said, "There's no wrong rhythm. Only a world that hasn't learned to listen long enough." On the final night, in the same old room at Château de Lumière, Amirah opened the window overlooking the southern garden. Below, there was no one. No Solange. No audience. Only wind whispering through the pines and the soft chirp of insects, as if nature itself were keeping time. Amirah closed her eyes, raised her hand, not to perform, but as a silent salute to the girl she used to be. That girl curled into silence, withdrawn from the world, had become a rhythm keeper of a new world. A world where every motion, no matter how small, held meaning. A world where a server with a prosthetic leg and a girl in a wheelchair could redefine what art means, what justice means, and what it means to be able. The night sky didn't burst with fireworks. Only a single shooting star drifted quietly past the frame of the window. And Amirah whispered, "Still moving."